So, I thought we would just start with a like icebreaker. What kind of things do you like to do to relax during the pandemic? Right? So you maybe just talk about something. I can start. I like to. My big go-to has been exercising. So in the fall it was mountain biking, and in the spring it's been cross-country skiing, or in the winter it's been cross-country skiing. So that's been my big go-to. And then also on the weekends I like to enjoy a show with my wife, as long as it's not Schitt's Creek, because I don't like that. How about you, Ben?
Well, when I'm not at work and exercising, I'm usually reading plenty of books.
Awesome.
Dozens, hundreds, if you will.
How many have you read, do you think, since the beginning of the pandemic? Do you know?
Since the beginning of the pandemic.
Because I remember you had a list on your wall.
You should get a Goodreads account.
Maybe.
I did Goodreads during the pandemic. It's so much fun because at the end of the year it shows you like total books that you read, total pages, total word count. It's like, so like during the pandemic I read like 1,000 pages, like 30,000 words, or whatever. No, not 30,000 words. I don't know. No, 30,000 pages.
Yeah.
30,000 pages makes more sense. Yeah, 30,000 pages, and then it was a lot of words.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's really cool.
I don't know since the pandemic started, but I think up on my wall I have about 70 books listed.
Wow. Impressive.
Yeah.
Cool. How about you, Josie?
I should probably read more. I watch a lot of TV, exercise, podcasts.
Oh. I'm a big podcast fan. You have a favorite podcast?
My mom really likes to listen to them, and so when I'm around her, she's always listening to them. There's one called Smartless. It's, I can't listen. It's just like 3 famous actors interviewing a lot of really cool people. You should, it's really funny. Yeah.
Podcasting and parenting go really well because you're always doing something when you're parenting,
Yeah.
but you can listen while you cook dinner, wash the dishes.
Like Ben, I also really love to read. So I love to read. Then over the summer I was running and preparing for cross country and then skiing. So yeah, reading and exercising. That's really nice.
Healthy habits. Good. So diving into this case, is there anyone who could just review the facts of the case for us? I think it'd just be helpful if somebody could just talk to us a little bit about the facts of the case.
Are we reading?
Or no, just like somebody who just summarize.
I can.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
I can summarize. So basically, in this New York district, in New York, the school district, this board of education, they basically sanctioned this prayer that would be said every morning by all students. But if you opted out, you could remain seated, you could remain silent, and it was supposed to be non-denominational, which basically means not really conforming to any one specific religion. So basically they said, everybody can embrace this prayer, and that's it. And then the parents of these 10 children, they filed complaints because they said it was contrary to their beliefs and their religions. And then it went up through the courts, and I think a lot of courts upheld, in favor of the Board of Education, until the Supreme Court, which ruled 6-1, basically saying that it was unconstitutional for the school to have this school-led prayer.
All right, nice summary. Thank you. So the driving question here is a voluntary school organized daily prayer in a public school a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment? So I want us to start by looking at the majority opinion and just looking at the logic of the majority opinion. Where should we start? Does somebody have a quotation they'd like to share or a question they have to get us going?
Sure. On page 159, on the dangers of union of church and state, it says, these people knew, some of them from bitter personal experience, that one of the greatest dangers to the freedom of the individual to worship in his own way lay in the government's placing its official stamp of approval upon one particular kind of prayer or one particular form of religious services. They knew the anguish hardship of their strife that could come when zealous religious groups struggled with one another to obtain the government's stamp of approval. You know, devil shit. So, he's got a point, because as we know, there have been wars that have been fought over religion, establish which one is better, and religion is definitely an area that can form extremists. And as we've seen, extremists are definitely willing to go the extra step sometimes, or an extreme step, if you will. And once again, I just think he's absolutely right. And so the government saying this is the way is really not the way.
Yeah, well, I think even just looking at the prayer, it's pretty clear that it says God, like in the first two words. And some religions don't have like a specific God. And so I think it is kind of like catered, I guess, towards a specific religion. Which is what they said it wasn't, but it actually is.
Do you mind reading the prayer there? I think it's on
Sure.
the bottom left. So.
Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country. It's kind of like intense, I would say, to say that in a school setting. Especially, I mean, like, I'm not specifically religious, and I have nothing against, like saying this, but I just feel weird saying that every day at school.
And I mean, when, like for example, when they were saying it's non-denominational, just by saying Almighty God, like Josie said, it definitely narrows it down because, for example, there's polytheism, which has multiple gods, and then there's also ones that don't even have a specific God being. Like maybe it's more about the community or more about you as yourself. And so saying Almighty God, that's not for a lot of people it might not specifically target their religion. I mean, even if they have a God that goes by a different name like Allah, it's not as inclusive as they think it might be. And so again, like Ben was saying, that these zealous religious groups, when there's this majority that has this opportunity to spread, it really it kind of tamps down the other children, especially since they're given the opportunity to stay silent, and everybody knows that they aren't conforming to this specific religion. And while it's it's thoughtful to say, okay, we're not forcing you to this, but again, it might put a target on their backs, because if there are any children who they might be, be bullied for, okay, why are you not saying the prayer? So I think it would result in a lot of contention.
Exactly, as Ben was saying, just imagine being in a classroom setting, without the pandemic, and there's 20 kids, all of them except yourself are standing up, hard over the chest, saying a prayer or something, right? And so I would imagine that would be a fairly uncomfortable position for you who is not participating in this prayer. And it certainly would apply a level of pressure upon an individual to join in with this prayer, or at least go along with it, which I believe go against what they're saying.
could bring up a second quote to kind of add on to that. When they're bringing in the First Amendment, at the bottom of 159, they say, "The First Amendment was added to the Constitution to stand as a guarantee that neither the power nor the prestige of the federal government would be used to control, support, or influence the kinds of prayer the American people can say." Basically, they're just rehashing the First Amendment, saying it basically forbids the federal government from having any say in what the American people can practice in religion. It's basically saying, okay, we will take a step back. We will not be involved in any religious aspects, and that's up to you. And then they're going on to say because this is it's actually a state board, it's a state education. They are mentioning the 14th Amendment, basically saying that this reinforces the ideas of the First Amendment. And then they finish it all up by saying no government, state or federal, can prescribe a religion to its people, which I thought was really interesting.
And I think although they're giving like kids an option to not say it, that's like, I think that's just as bad. I feel like this, I wouldn't say, I mean, I guess they are being kind of silenced because they're literally being silent while they're saying this, but I think it's,
I'm curious, like, what makes it really offensive to you for that they have to, even if they're silent? I'm just curious.
because they're not like giving them an option to practice their religion. They're only giving certain people an option to, and being silent is like saying, oh, your religion isn't like, it shouldn't be practiced here, doesn't matter as much as this religion.
I can speak from personal experience. When I was in the first grade, I went to first grade in Italy. I had a religion class, it was Christianity, and there were two Muslim kids in my class, and then every time they were taken out of the class to go to a separate room because they had their own religion class. But it was always, I was really good friends with them. It was really always disappointing to see them leave. And I just feel like having this specific religion, it cleaves people apart more than bringing them together as a community, because you can't force everybody to have the same religion. And just by making this already, it leaves people out. And another quote basically saying that a historical fact is that governmentally established religions and religious persecutions go hand in hand, was really powerful, because it showed that these people who are being silenced, they're way more likely to be the target of these persecutions.
Where's that then?
It's on 161 at the end of that first paragraph. And just if you look at historical evidence, like the Crusades, where the Christianity was being spread and every other religion was being purged, it was because the majority religion, when it was given the power of the government to spread, it had big implications for other religions.
And the government, or state government, which ultimately is part of the union, were to endorse one religion, then to involve everybody, then they need to endorse other religions, and like all of them, and bring them back to square one. And yet, in the first place, the government cannot endorse one religion because the United States does not have an official religion. It's been stated multiple times throughout our history that we do not have an official religion. So, ultimately, it should just be left alone, like it was prior to 1962, I guess. And I'd love to talk about the dissenting opinion, because they bring up some juicy points.
I think that we should definitely, I want to spend some time talking about the dissenting opinion, but think there's still a little bit more to unpack from the majority opinion. Is there any other quotations people want to bring up?
Well, they talk about what the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause, how they forbid two quite different kinds of governmental encroachment, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, where does it talk about
So page 160, kind of near the end, on protection of both government and religion, it says the Establishment Clause, unlike the Free Exercise Clause, does not depend upon any showing of direct governmental compulsion. It is violated by the enactment of laws which establish an official religion, whether those laws operate directly to coerce non-observant individuals or not. So I thought that was a really effective thing to say, because it doesn't, like the Establishment Clause, it doesn't necessarily mean that, do this religion, okay? It's basically saying carrying out of these laws that basically kind of going to incorporate some of these religious aspects into the daily lives of, in this case, students.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of also interesting if you look at it in kind of a different perspective. Like when I was thinking of it, I was almost like in like a whimsical perspective. It kind of puts it into perspective. For example, if the government said, like endorsed one type of soda, like say Coca-Cola, it says like we're only allowing you to drink Coca-Cola. You can't drink any other soda. And then there are people who want to drink Pepsi. There are people who want to drink Sprite. And then by drinking those, they would be like ridiculed or whatever, and everybody would be like, oh, Coca-Cola, that's the best one. And meanwhile, there are all these other people who like these other sodas, but they can't drink their sodas freely because, that would be going against the will of the greater government. And so I think and then you just replace soda with religion, and that kind of puts it into perspective. And then you imagine in class, the teacher's like, okay, everybody who loves Coca-Cola, let's get to work together and show our love for Coca-Cola. And then everybody else, you just sit down and be quiet. And it kind of, really shows how powerful it can be.
I just don't even understand why they did it in the first place. Like, it's not a religious school. It's like they just decided to say that one day. Like, I don't know.
In the background, it talks a little bit about how this was something that was passed by the New York's state regents, which sets sort of an education policy for the state. So I think it's important to remember the historical time period where prayer in school was more accepted at that time. What if, but it's interesting, I mean, I can see why you have that reaction. What if someone were to argue that, well, this prayer is really just non-denominational? How might you counter that? Or how does the case counter that?
Well, how I would counter it was that not everybody has a religion.
Yep.
Not everyone prays the same way. So, isn't there one religion where you have a mat and then I'm not a religious expert, but the point is there's different forms of prayer, and I believe that the way that they were doing it is very Christian, I want to say, maybe, yeah. And so that in itself is kind of endorsing Christianity specifically.
And you could also put the prayer into a different perspective. Like if it said Almighty Gods, like plural, then that would instantly just shove Christianity away. And so if that were the prayer, I mean Almighty Gods, well then all the Christian kids would be like, there's only one God. So, that kind of shows just how, just like that one word God, it's very specific towards Christianity. Because there are deities, they're called gods, like in Greek mythology, whatever, but they're plural. There's not one singular God. And I feel like I think they kind of want God to be kind of this word that can be like just a substitute for anything in a religion, like any superior being. But I don't think that works for every religion. So it is, like Ben said, white Christian.
And I think if it was truly non-denominational, then everybody would be able to say it. And obviously there were people that weren't able to because it is denominational. Like, it's just kind of like very simple.
Well, yeah, like what you were saying, if it was non-denominational, then this case wouldn't even exist because everybody would be comfortable with it and everybody would be fine with it. So.
I'm just curious, I'm going to point us to a passage. I'm just kind of curious to see what you think about it on page 160. It's that page we've been in. Just like the third sentence down. It said, the respondent's argument to the contrary, which is largely based upon the contention that the Regent's prayer is non-denominational, and the fact that the program, as modified and approved by state courts, does not require all pupils to recite the prayer, but permits those who wish to do so to remain silent or be excused from the room, ignores the essential nature of the program's constitutional defects. Neither the fact that the prayer may be denominationally neutral, nor the fact that its observance on the part of the students is voluntary can serve to free it from the limitations of the Establishment Clause, as it might free from the Free Exercise Clause. Anyway, and then I think Ben was reading a little bit from, maybe just a little more. So, yeah, anyway, I just was curious to see what do you think they're getting at. It seems like they're driving at a similar point to what you're saying.
Well, what I immediately got out of that is it's basically showing how the Constitution and the amendments, there's always different kind of ways to look at it. If you only used the Free Exercise Clause, and if the Establishment Clause didn't exist, then this would probably pass through because they're saying, oh, because the kids get not to say the prayer, they have the free exercise right not to participate, right? But then, so this case is exempt from the Free Exercise Clause, like they wouldn't be able to bring that up to prove any point. But when you look at the Establishment Clause, it's very stark that, because it's just a different side of the same coin with the First Amendment, the religious parts of it. So that's what I heard out of it.
Yeah. The fact that it's voluntary, you seem to say it doesn't matter. The fact that they're saying it's non-denominational, you're saying it doesn't seem to matter. Why? No, anybody, why?
Well, I think we've already established that it's mainly focused on one specific religion or area of religion. And just to go give them the A-OK in the first place. Saying, yeah, you can do this, but none of the other stuff. I mean, this is what's allowed.
Yeah. What do you think, Ben? Are we ready to talk about the dissent?
Well, I actually have one.
You have one more there?
Well, it's kind of like a central question
Yeah.
that would kind of maybe lead into the dissenting opinion, maybe. But also, it might get a little bit out of hand, but I'll just ask it. So if the prayer was, so if it wasn't sanctioned by the school and instead it was this, like a student-led prayer, would it be allowed? Because it wouldn't be sanctioned by any government because it's these students. But then would that, see, I'm just wondering, because then that would probably come up as a Free Exercise Clause. But if the school was allowing this to happen, would it also lead into the Establishment Clause because they are basically sanctioning it because they're allowing it to happen?
Juicy question.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think that the school would be allowed to stop it, because that would be the state stopping you from expressing your religion. And I think it'd probably be totally fine if it was a student-led one. Like if I just suddenly stood up and wanted to preach the good word of the Lord, I think it'd be allowed, right? Yeah.
But see, then that gets really tight because it's like, on one hand, okay, you're allowed to say this prayer, But if you're saying it in the school building, it's a government building, you might be subject to, okay, that's an establishment clause problem because we're allowing you to use our facility to spread your faith, which might affect our other students. And then if the school forbids it, then that's a problem with the free exercise because, we are allowed to freely exercise our faith. So I feel like that's where it really gets tricky. You have to it's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, I would want to know the circumstances of it. I think the circumstances matter.
Right.
So what circumstances do you think would make it not allowable? And then what circumstances would make it allowable? Because I would say that you could have free exercise of prayer within school. But it's all dependent on whether it violates the establishment clause or not, as you were suggesting.
I would say like a club or something where you're it's all, I guess it would be the same religion. Then you're not discriminating against any religion. And if someone claims that you are, they don't have to be there in the first place.
So a religion club.
If you're like preaching to people that believe the same thing, and you're not silencing.
I think one where it would definitely not be allowed is if you look at basically the same, like the prayer, like the morning prayer, if the teacher, said, okay, like it gives a student the power to stand up in front of the class and lead a prayer. For example, the same way that you do the Pledge of Allegiance, if the teacher allowed that to happen, then I think that would be possible.
Why is that different?
It's different because it's kind of in the same area as you can tell because you're having this diverse group of people involved and you're focusing specifically on one thing and you're trying to get everybody involved, but there's some people who just aren't, obviously they don't conform to that religion, and it would not be permissible because the teacher would be present and giving them this balcony, like this area of power, basically.
And that would suggest some sort of endorsement.
Because like Josie was saying, if it's a group, you sign up based on faith. Because if it's a Christian club, oh yes, I'm Christian, let's go there. Or if it's an Islam club, you're like, oh, I'm Muslim, let's go there. Then, it's kind of that.
It's voluntary,
Exactly.
Interestingly, that I was talking to Miss Cadwell, and she said that there was many years ago, maybe 10 years ago or more, there was a group of born-again Christians that would meet for a prayer before the school day outside the building in front of the school and where the buses are. And that was allowed because it was by choice. So it sort of speaks to what you're talking about, that it's kind of free exercise.
I'm wondering one last example.
Sure.
So for example, if someone incorporated a religious aspect or like even a sermon into their, say, valedictorian speech, how would the school approach that with that? Because
A student?
Yeah, so a student, they're giving their senior year speech, whatever, something like that, and basically they have the whole school is watching. Would this be, if the school didn't allow them, they would kind of be subverting their free exercise rights. But if the school allowed it, they would also be allowing this establishment clause to happen because they're giving them basically the entire school's ears.
It's an interesting question. You get into these gray area situations, right? School especially gets us into these gray areas. And I'm not aware of a case of where there's a challenge like that. I think it certainly would be different if a teacher did that. If the teacher was giving the address to the graduating class, do you think that would be a violation? To me, that seems more like a violation. If the student, that seems like a little bit more gray area, but that's interesting.
I mean, I remember reading something in the textbook that
They were talking about a prayer group, Bridget, at the beginning of the very beginning of the textbook, they talked about a prayer group, and whether it's allowed.
that's what I immediately thought of when Josie mentioned it.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can go on to Ben's much wanted dissenting opinion.
Ben, start us off. Something about the dissenting opinion that you were curious about.
Well, I just think it's interesting in the very last bit on 163 when they talk about the traditions of religious practice in government, because we certainly do have religious references within some of our more basic governmental processes. And, like having one nation under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, even though there's some serious historical context behind that, I wonder about that, because that is a fair point. I mean, when you think about the inauguration, for example, they go up, put their hand in the Bible, even though they have the option not to, and say, "So help me God" at the end.
Yeah, what do people think about this?
I'm just wondering, like, what other book would they use if they weren't, like, if they didn't have a religion that they were practicing?
You just
Because I know,
raise your hand, but maybe.
Maybe you could use the Constitution.
yeah,
Or if you're saying if something was not religious at all.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because, like, Obama wasn't, like, super religious, but he's still,
Certainly,
I don't know. I guess it just
practicing
depends
Christian.
on how strongly.
Well, I'm also wondering, because only the Bible has been, for presidency at least, only the Bible has been used, right? But then for like the House, I'm pretty sure that the Torah has been using the Quran. So basically, in religion, that's like, it's whatever book you want to use. And then for atheism, I'm not actually sure. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. So it seems like so the title of this is on traditions of religious practice in government. What are people's opinions of these things? Ben seems to be saying, well, it's kind of an interesting point, this idea that this is already embedded in our country's history.
Yeah.
What do people think?
I mean, one thing that I could imagine is, so he's mentioning that in the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, if the school day starts out, you start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then you just go to the prayer, and you're forbidding the prayer from being said, basically the same exact thing as being said in the Pledge of Allegiance, pretty much, like with that under God thing. So by forbidding the prayer from being said, I guess in the dissenting opinion he's saying, well, then you're kind of taking away some of that culture that, for example, the Pledge of Allegiance that we've adopted into our society.
What do others think?
Well, I just think, like in Vermont, I feel like it's not as like talked about, because like when I was younger, I honestly didn't even know like what the Pledge of